I never used to think much about the way a house sounds at night. Before Willoughby Road, I could sleep through sirens, neighbors arguing across thin apartment walls, even the occasional late-night party in Seattle. Noise meant life. Noise meant people. Noise meant I wasn't alone. But silence, true silence, became something I learned to fear. That fear started a year before we bought the house. I was working late on a freelance assignment when someone rattled my apartment doorknob hard enough to shake the frame. At first I thought it was drunk neighbors. Then a voice whispered through the crack beneath the door. "I know you're up." Just one sentence, stretched into a hiss. The police found nothing, and no one believed it was anything more than some unstable stranger passing through the building. But the moment stayed with me. It changed the way I felt about being alone. It changed the way silence sounded. By the time I met Noah, I was still carrying that fear like a bruise. He made things feel normal again. He was steady, patient, and the kind of man who remembered to check his car's oil but forgot his own lunch. We married quickly, the kind of quick that people raise their eyebrows at but don't fight you on. After too many rentals, we finally saved enough to look for a house. Willoughby Road seemed like the escape we were waiting for, quiet, out of the way, a place where we could stop tripping over our neighbors' lives. But from the first night sleeping there, something about the stillness scraped at me. No traffic, no voices, no noise at all. I tried to convince myself it was just an adjustment. I kept cleaning, decorating, unpacking, anything to fill the silence. Noah loved it. "It's peaceful," he'd say. I wished I could feel that way. On November 18th, 2019, Noah left for an overnight shift with his marine research team. He apologized for the timing as he packed his gear. I assured him I'd be fine, even though my stomach was tight. As his truck rolled down the street around 6:30 p.m., the quiet settled in immediately. I cooked leftovers, flipped through my sketchbooks, turned on a documentary just for background noise. Around 9, the brass wind chime on the back deck rang sharply, one short metallic note. There was no wind. The air had been still all evening. I stepped outside with a flashlight, checking the yard. Nothing. The chime hung motionless. I went back in and forced myself not to think about it. At 10:17, I texted Noah, "Are you close to done? Feel a little weird tonight." No reply. He was likely in a dead zone near the coast. I turned on the kettle for tea. When it whistled, I reached to turn it off and only then realized I'd missed a soft sound underneath it. A quiet click, metal on metal, a door latch. I checked the front door. Locked. The back door. Locked. Then the basement. The door was open. Not ajar open. We barely used the basement. Noah always joked it felt like a bunker down there. I whispered to myself that maybe the draft pulled it, even though it made no sense. I stepped closer. That's when I heard footsteps. Slow, soft, concrete softening each step just enough to make it worse. Someone was down there. I felt it as clearly as if a hand had closed around my throat. "Who's down there?" My voice cracked. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed felt deliberate. I grabbed my phone. Before I could dial 911, a notification appeared. Motion detected upstairs hallway. Upstairs. I turned slowly toward the staircase. In the dim glow from the nightlight, a shape moved into the guest bedroom, a figure, tall, not rushing, not hiding. Waiting. I ran out the front door barefoot, sprinted across the cold road, and pounded on Mrs. Callahan's door. She let me in without hesitation and called the police. From her living room window, I watched my dark house until the patrol cars arrived. The officers searched for almost an hour. When they returned, their faces gave everything away. "Ma'am, there's no one in the house." I tried to explain the open basement door, the footsteps, the motion alert, but the officers traded looks that made my skin crawl. They spoke gently, like they were worried about my mental state. Noah got home after 3 a.m. I told him everything. He held me tightly and tried to reason through it. The house settling, my anxiety, the memory from Seattle. I let him talk, but as we walked back home together, I saw what the police had missed. Fresh, muddy footprints, leading from the basement window to the tree line, ending abruptly, no return path. Someone had been watching. I didn't sleep. Not that night. Not for several nights. Noah suggested therapy. I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I was too tired to argue. The next morning, While he showered, I went into the basement. The air was colder than the rest of the house. On the concrete floor were faint arcs, shoe scuffs, fresh. Someone had stood there, turned there. I didn't tell Noah. From then on, I monitored everything. I checked locks obsessively. I placed small objects in specific positions to see if they moved. A week later, one did. A ceramic tray on the living room table rotated 90 degrees. I hadn't touched it. Noah hadn't been home. A few days after that, I found the brass wind chime on the guest bedroom nightstand. I hadn't brought it inside. That room was the same one the intruder had slipped into. Beneath the chime, in a thin layer of dust, was the faint drag of a fingertip. Someone had carried it upstairs. I installed cameras while Noah worked. Small ones he wouldn't question if he noticed them later. I placed one in the hallway vent, another on the basement stairs, another pointed at the guest room door. A few nights passed quietly, then I heard it again. Crunch, crunch, footsteps on gravel, moving slowly toward the house. I checked the driveway camera. No one. The gravel sound continued soft, steady, impossibly close. My skin prickled as I switched feeds. Nothing on the side yard, nothing on the back, but on the basement stairwell camera a shadow. Humanoid, still, as if someone stood just out of the camera's full view. When I blinked, it was gone. I fled to Mrs. Callahan's again. The police searched again. Same conclusion. Nothing there. No signs of forced entry. No acknowledgement of the footprints, the shadow, the movement. Noah didn't dismiss me this time. He looked shaken. He held me like he didn't know what to say. Maybe it's the trauma resurfacing, he whispered. Maybe everything feels connected because of what happened in Seattle. I didn't respond. I knew what I had seen. A few days later, around 3:42 a.m., the basement camera caught something, one clean second of a man stepping out from behind the furnace. He looked up toward the stairs, paused, then retreated into the dark. Noah watched the footage twice, then said, "We're leaving. Today." We packed quickly. Before we left, I went back for my sketchbooks. The hallway felt wrong the moment I stepped into it, colder, tighter. The guest bedroom door, which I had closed that morning, was open again. On the pillow lay a single item, my house key. The key I'd dropped weeks earlier and never found. I didn't touch it. We sold the house within a week, barely above what we still owed. I never stepped foot inside it again. Years have passed. Noah and I sleep with a security bar on the door. Motion lights, a dog, neighbors close enough to hear if something happens. I tell myself I'm safe. Most days, I believe it. But some nights, when everything is still and the quiet begins to stretch, I hear the memory of those footsteps. Crunch, 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 coming forward, out of the dark. Because whoever came inside our home didn't take anything physical. They didn't rob us. They didn't break anything. What they stole was certainty, safety, the small illusion that your home is always your space. And someone who studies you that closely doesn't stop just because you moved. Your instincts are worth trusting. Fear doesn't always lie, and sometimes believing yourself is the first and most important step toward protecting your life. Never let anyone, even those who love you, convince you to ignore what your gut already knows. Long before the night that changed everything, I thought fear was something you eventually grew out of. When I was a kid, my dad used to tell me that darkness was just the world without details, nothing more. But ever since the winter when I swore I heard someone whisper my name from the back porch at 2 a.m., I didn't trust darkness or silence anymore. My parents laughed it off, telling me it was the siding scraping in the wind, but the sound of that whisper stayed with me. After that, I double-checked every lock in the house before bed. On December 18, 2016, I found myself alone again in our old house on Baywood Hill. My parents were working late, and my brother Noah was away at school. Snow had fallen earlier that day, muting the entire neighborhood. The whole place felt hollow, like the world was holding its breath. I tried sketching to distract myself, a habit that usually eased my anxiety, but I couldn't shake this strange tension, like someone was standing just behind me. Around 9:47 p.m., I got up to make hot chocolate. That's when I heard it slow, deliberate crunching outside. Not an animal, Footsteps. I froze. The footsteps paused, then continued, each one sinking into the snow with purpose. I moved toward the hallway window, stopping myself before lifting the curtain. I'd made that mistake once already when I peeked outside late one night and saw a tall shape behind our oak tree. It vanished before I could blink, but the image never left me. I reached for the curtain again when my phone buzzed unexpectedly. Unknown number, asterisk, stop looking, asterisk. My stomach dropped. I hadn't even touched the curtain yet. The footsteps stopped. I turned off every light in the living room and grabbed my dad's heavy flashlight from the drawer. Before I could take another step, I heard a new sound from outside light tapping on the siding below the living room window. Slow, rhythmical, too controlled to be wind. My breathing turned shaky. I whispered to myself that it was nothing, but fear doesn't listen to reason. I lifted the curtain just an inch. There was one footprint in the middle of the yard, just one, deep, clear, facing the house. The rest of the snow was untouched. I backed away so fast I nearly fell. A single footprint made no sense. No one could walk across fresh snow and leave only one. I tried calling my parents, no answer. Noah didn't pick up either. The tapping returned, but now I recognized it wasn't tapping. It was breathing. Slow, heavy breaths pressed against the siding. Panic pushed me forward. I grabbed my coat, boots, and bolted out the front door, running toward the neighbor's house. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Every few steps, I felt the slightest shift of air behind me, like something was following without disturbing the snow. I reached the neighbor's porch, pounded on the door, and the porch light flickered on. For a split second, I glanced back toward my house. Something stood behind the oak tree, tall, motionless, watching. Mr. Halpern opened the door, confused and startled by my shaking. "Elena? What happened?" I told him about the footsteps, the text, the breathing, the footprint. His expression shifted from confusion to shock. He let me inside immediately and called the sheriff's office. I waited on the couch while he talked to dispatch, unable to stop staring at the dark window in his living room. Officer Davies arrived within 10 minutes, walked around the outside of my house with a flashlight, and came back reporting what I already knew he'd say. I found one footprint, but no trail. Could be snow from a branch or something dropping. "Branches don't fall in perfect boot shapes," I said. He shrugged like he'd heard this kind of panic before. "Text could be a spoof bot, happens all the time. As for the breathing, old siding makes strange sounds. It wasn't the house. I don't doubt you're scared. I just don't have evidence of a person out there." I hated that answer, but what else could he say? He told me to stay inside and call again if anything happened. Halpern insisted I sleep in his guest room. I didn't argue, though I doubted I'd sleep at all. I curled on the couch, the TV on low for comfort. But then I heard it again. Breathing. Slow, heavy. Right beneath the window. I grabbed the flashlight and crept toward the sound. Halpern came downstairs when he heard me moving and pressed his eye against the peephole. "There's nobody out there," he whispered. But something had been there. I could feel it. By morning, light snowfall had covered the yard, wiping away the footprint. But something else waited for me in the living room of my own house. My sketchbook was on the floor. Inside, it was a new drawing, one I didn't make. A charcoal sketch of the oak tree, a tall figure behind it. Underneath, asterisk, "I told you not to look," asterisk. My hands shook as my parents listened to what happened. Dad told me I was exhausted, that fear was blurring what was real. Mom suggested the footprint could have been older than I thought. Neither of them could explain the text or the drawing, but they tried their best to soften every detail, like the softer the words, the less they'd scare me. That night, we all stayed together in the living room. My dad checked the locks repeatedly. My mom kept peeking out the curtains even though she didn't want to admit she was scared too. Noah FaceTimed me and tried to joke about it, but he watched me too closely to hide his own worry. At 1:13 a.m., the house made a loud pop. Everyone jumped. "That's just the siding," Dad said, but his voice trembled slightly. 4 minutes later, it happened again. Not a pop. A tap. Tap. Tap tap. The exact rhythm from the night before. Dad stood with the baseball bat he kept under the couch. "I'll check." "Don't," I whispered. He pulled the curtain open anyway. The yard was empty, but at the bottom corner of the window, on the inside of the glass, was a faint, foggy smear. like someone had breathed against it from outside. Dad's face went pale. "Pack a bag," he said. "We're leaving." We stayed at my aunt's place for 2 weeks. When we returned, the house felt unfamiliar, too still, too quiet. My parents replaced locks, installed motion lights, even put cameras near the back porch. The first night back, I walked through the house slowly, checking every corner against the memory of that breathing. I tried to go back to normal school, homework, sketching, but every time I sat near a window, I felt the heaviness return. The fear didn't fade. It just hid, waiting for quiet moments to come back. 3 days after we returned, I found something that made my heart drop. Another page in my sketchbook. 4 shaky words this time. Asterisk, "You shouldn't have run." Asterisk. My legs gave out. I sat on the floor, shaking, staring at the page. No door was broken, no window was disturbed. The alarm hadn't gone off. But something had been in the house again. Something comfortable enough to stand near me while I slept. Something still watching. I didn't show my parents right away. I didn't want them to panic the way I was. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made my heartbeat jump. I kept thinking about the yard, about that single footprint, about whatever had stood behind the oak tree watching me run. I finally worked up the nerve to show them the sketch. My dad didn't say anything. He stared at it for a long time, then got up and began checking every lock and every camera feed again. My mom hugged me hard, telling me it was over, that maybe someone had been messing with us for weeks before the first night I noticed. But no explanation made sense. A person would have left footprints. A person couldn't move across snow without a trail. A person couldn't breathe against a second-floor window without standing on something. And no prankster would have access to my sketchbook without leaving behind a single trace. For the next month, the house stayed quiet. No sounds, no texts, no drawings, just a constant tension that never faded. Then, on a cold morning in late January, I opened my sketchbook again, hoping the fear had finally loosened its grip. There was one last drawing. The oak tree. The figure behind it. Closer this time. And beneath it, written in uneven lines, asterisk, "See you next winter." Asterisk. I closed the book and shoved it deep into a drawer. I didn't want to look at it again. I didn't want any reminder of that night, or whatever watched me from the yard. I still don't know if it was a person or something else. I don't know how it moved or what it wanted. All I know is that fear doesn't always come from imagination. Sometimes it comes from something real. Something that waits for darkness and silence to return. And if you ever feel watched in your own home, trust that feeling. Some things don't need proof to be dangerous. Trust your instincts. Fear is often your mind recognizing a threat before your eyes do. Never ignore the warning. My name is Ethan Rowley, and quiet places have always been the only places where I felt like myself. I grew up avoiding crowds, avoiding noise, avoiding anything that forced me into conversation. Some people thought I was rude or shy, but the truth was simpler. Being around others made my chest feel tight, like I was running out of air. I learned early to keep my world small, predictable, controlled. That need for control came from a winter afternoon when I was 16. I stayed late after school to help clean up after basketball practice, and the coach asked me to drop the equipment in the storage shed behind the gym. I stepped inside, set the gear down, and the wind slammed the door shut behind me. I thought someone would open it, but they didn't. I didn't have my phone, and the air was freezing. At first I told myself it was fine, but when the sun went down and the shed got darker and colder, I started pounding on the walls with my fists until they stung. No one heard me. By the time the janitor finally opened the door, I was curled up on the floor, shaking so badly I couldn't stand. I never told anyone how much that night stayed with me. After that, anything enclosed or dimly lit messed with my breathing. I hated how it made me feel weak, so I kept it to myself and pretended nothing bothered me. By the time I turned 22, I needed money for college. I applied for a seasonal night cleaning job at Arborview Self-Storage. People usually avoided that district. It was colder than the rest of town, and the roads were lined with half-abandoned businesses, but to me, the quiet felt manageable. I worked alone most nights, sweeping concrete floors, emptying trash bins, checking locks. The pay wasn't great, but the silence suited me. The buildings were long metal warehouses divided into rows of storage units. During the day, Renters came and went. At night, the place turned into a maze of dim hallways where every sound echoed footsteps, wind, metal doors flexing in the cold. Most people would have found it eerie. I found it predictable. My supervisor, Randall, handled paperwork and rarely walked the halls. He wasn't the type to pry into anyone's life, which made working with him easy. The units were numbered, the schedule was consistent, and there were no surprises. At least, until one December night, when everything changed. The shift started like any other. It was just before midnight, and I was unlocking the supply closet when my phone buzzed. It was Randall. His voice sounded worn out and sick. "Ethan, I'm not coming in. Flu hit me hard. You'll be closing alone tonight." I hated the sudden pressure in my chest, but I answered, "I can handle it." "It's a slow night," he said. "Just do your rounds and lock up." He hung up mid-cough, leaving me staring at my phone and wishing he hadn't said the words, "alone tonight." But I knew the job. I'd done almost everything solo before. This was no different, at least. That's what I tried to tell myself. By 12:30, I was walking down Wing C, sweeping the narrow concrete path between rows of frozen metal doors. The wind outside rattled the siding, creating dull metallic thumps that traveled down the hallway. I paused to check the old paper logbook, mounted on the wall, an outdated record Randall kept as backup in case the digital system failed. Something didn't match. Unit #47, which had been marked vacant since before I started working there, now had a handwritten note beside it, "Occupied." The digital system still showed it as inactive. I stared at the two conflicting entries, feeling a faint twinge in my gut. Paper logs were often sloppy. Maybe a renter filled out the paperwork and never moved in. I tried not to dwell on it, but when I continued down the hallway, something stopped me. Right in front of Unit #47 lay a small stuffed penguin, clean, upright, and out of place. I picked it up. It felt warm, as if someone had held it minutes earlier. I looked around the hall, empty, silent, still. My stomach tightened. Toys didn't just appear in deserted storage units in the middle of a freezing night. I set it on my cart and crouched in front of the unit door. The latch wasn't locked. That alone broke protocol. Every empty unit stayed padlocked. I reached for the handle and tugged lightly. It resisted. For a second, it felt like someone was pressing against it from the inside. Then, without warning, the door jerked upward halfway with a violent metallic clatter. The noise shot straight through my nerves. The space inside was swallowed in a darkness deeper than the unlit units around it. My flashlight flickered the second I aimed it in. The beam cut through dust, but the darkness swallowed it fast. The air inside the unit felt colder than the hallway, like the temperature dropped into a pocket of stillness. I took one step backward. The hallway lights behind me shut off. Not all at once, but one by one, starting from the far end and moving toward me. Each click echoed like a countdown. My breath caught. My pulse thudded in my ears. When the light above me flickered and died, the exit door at the end of the hall locked itself with a heavy metallic slam. It was impossible. The doors were programmed to lock automatically at 3 a.m., not midnight. Something else had triggered the system. I turned toward Unit #47 again, every instinct screaming to run, but my feet refused to move. A voice drifted out of the darkness inside the unit. "You're early tonight." Not a whisper, not eerie, just a calm, low male voice, irritated, like someone had shown up before he was ready. I froze. My fight-or-flight mode short-circuited. I dove behind a row of metal shelving, tucking myself low enough that the shadows hid me. My breaths felt too loud, but I tried to slow them. Then footsteps. Measured, heavy, confident. The figure stepped out of Unit #47. Even in the dim emergency lighting, I could make out the details. Tall, wearing a long coat, work gloves, boots that hit the concrete with purpose. He held bolt cutters in one hand, and he wasn't surprised by the darkness. He moved like he knew the layout by heart. He spoke again, this time into a small earpiece. "The cleaner saw the wrong door," he said. "I'll handle it." My mouth went dry. Stolen goods, secret operations, someone living inside the abandoned unit. Everything made sense in a horrible, sudden way. He wasn't hiding from me. He was preparing to get rid of me. I needed somewhere he wouldn't think to check, and my mind grabbed onto the one place I hated, the narrow maintenance vent behind the utility closet. It wasn't made for people. but it was my only shot. While he checked the opposite side of the hallway, I slipped into the closet and pushed open the metal panel. Dust billowed into my face as I crawled inside. My back scraped the top of the shaft, and memories of that high school shed exploded through my chest. My breathing shortened, almost turning into a panic attack. I forced my hand over my mouth until the urge to cry out passed. Below me, the man walked slowly, scanning the shadows. "He has to be here," he muttered. I inched forward through the vent, careful not to shake it. Every metal creak sounded like thunder to me. When I reached the screen at the end, I saw the walkway below. A loose pipe rested next to the grate. I pushed it off with my elbow. It clattered loudly across the concrete. The thief whipped around and sprinted toward the noise, cursing into his earpiece. I kicked open the vent cover, dropped to the floor, twisted my ankle on landing, but forced myself up and ran toward the loading bay. I almost made it, but the emergency shutters slammed down before I reached the door, trapping me again. The thief had access to the building's controls. He must have worked here once. The panic rose again loud, suffocating, but this time I pushed through it. Randall had shown me the old fire suppression test switch during training. "Don't pull this unless there's a real emergency," he'd warned. I grabbed a wrench from my cart and smashed the switch. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then every sprinkler in the building erupted. Water blasted from the ceiling, soaking the floors and shorting out the emergency lights. The fire alarm roared to life, sending an automatic signal to the district responders. Sirens wailed in the distance. Through the sheets of water, I saw the thief turn and run toward the back of the building. He pushed through a maintenance door only employees should have known existed. By the time the police arrived, the place was drenched. They searched Unit #47 and found stolen electronics, piles of boxed devices, and evidence someone had been living inside the unit: food cans, blankets, a small heater, printouts of employee schedules. They found footprints, heavy boot treads leading out the back door, but no suspect. I gave my statement, still shaking, still soaked, still replaying the man's voice in my head. "You're early tonight." It stayed with me more than anything else. It meant he wasn't startled. He was expecting someone else. Someone who was supposed to meet him that night, in the dark. Someone I never saw. I quit the job the next morning. Didn't even wait to hear what Randall had to say. I couldn't walk back into that place without feeling like the walls would close in. Months later, I saw a local news report about a former storage facility guard who'd been fired in 2017 for misconduct. The sketch in the report looked unnervingly like the man I saw that night. According to the report, he'd vanished after leaving several previous jobs. Authorities still hadn't found him. Some nights, when the wind rattles the windows in my apartment, I think about that hallway going dark, the stuffed penguin on the floor, the voice saying I was early. And I still wonder who was supposed to arrive after me. I hope they never did. Trust your instincts. They often warn you long before danger becomes visible, and listening to them might save your life. Long before the worst night of my life, I believed moving to the outskirts of Kelford, Montana would finally quiet the parts of me still tangled in old fear. When I was 25, someone broke into my apartment while I slept. I never saw the person, but I heard him slow, calm, opening drawers while I hid in my bedroom closet. After that night, I triple-checked locks, slept with lights on, and kept a heavy flashlight under my pillow. Therapy helped less than I hoped. Time helped even less. At 32, I rented a fading farmhouse surrounded by miles of abandoned wheat fields. The locals called it Whisper Field, because wind moving through the dead stalks made a soft, murmuring sound. At first it unnerved me. Eventually it became part of the background, the way some people get used to living near a highway. The nearest neighbor lived a mile away, and most nights the silence felt like a blanket. Work kept me busy. I was a wildlife photographer, often editing late into the night with the old wood stove knocking in the corner. By December, winter had buried the landscape in white and made the nights stretch longer than they should. On the evening of the 14th, I was editing owl migration photos when the lights flickered. Power flickers were common, but this one lingered long enough for the house to feel like it was inhaling. The wind outside went oddly still, and for a moment even Whisper Field felt muted. I tried to shake the tension building in my chest. Trauma rewires your body. Even silence can feel like a warning. Around 9, I heard something behind the shed, A slow, heavy step in the snow. I stood, listening. After a few seconds, a whistle floated through the cold, short, controlled, unmistakably human. I felt that old panic uncoil in me. I walked to the porch, shining my flashlight toward the fields, but all I saw was drifting snow and the black line of the horizon. "Anyone out there?" I called. Only the field answered, shifting in a long whisper. The sound usually washed over me, but that night it felt patterned, as if someone were walking through the stalks, pausing, whispering back. I stepped inside and locked every door twice. I kept hearing faint pacing outside the kitchen window, like someone circling the house. Sometime after midnight, exhaustion pulled me under. I must have slept less than an hour because when glass shattered at 1:13 a.m., it felt like I woke into someone else's dream. Voices followed immediately, not whispers, men shouting. "Push the side door. Check the windows. He's awake, move." My mind split between instinct and disbelief. 3, maybe 4 of them, boots pounding across the porch, someone laughing as they pried at the kitchen door. I grabbed my phone and whispered to the 911 dispatcher that men were breaking in. She told me to stay hidden, but they were already inside, coming in through the broken mudroom window. I ran upstairs, barely thinking, and forced open my bedroom window. The metal roof outside was covered in ice, but I crawled out anyway, gripping the edge until my hands went numb. Inside, the men tore through my bedroom, throwing things, cursing. "He has to be here. Don't screw this up again." Again. The word made my stomach drop. I pressed myself flat against the roof, praying the sirens would reach me before the men did. When the distant wail of sirens finally echoed across the fields, the men scattered, boots thundered down the stairs, and within seconds the house went quiet. I stayed on the roof until flashlights bobbed around the yard and officers called my name. Inside, the destruction was worse than I expected. Drawers emptied, mattress slashed, photos ripped, cabinets torn open. Not a single valuable missing. "They weren't here to steal," an officer said. His tone made it real in a way my mind hadn't caught up to yet. "They were looking for me." The officers questioned me for an hour. Did I know anyone who'd do this? Had I noticed anything unusual recently? I mentioned the footsteps behind the shed, the whistle, the feeling of being watched. They wrote it down, but their eyes said they weren't sure whether the sounds were real or my past trauma coloring a dark night. Before leaving, they recommended I stay somewhere else. I promised I would, though I had no idea where. Photography took me to isolated places so often that I'd unintentionally shaped a life without many close connections. My family lived several states away. As soon as they left, the silence felt wrong again, heavy, tight, like the house was remembering the men who had stormed through it. The cold crept in through the broken mudroom window, and I found myself sweeping glass just to have something to do with my hands. An officer returned mid-morning to say they'd found footprints circling the house, multiple sets. They had been walking around for hours before breaking in, watching, waiting for the right moment. And the strangest part, the footprints behind my shed were stamped deep, like someone had stood there a long time. That matched the whistle, and the feeling of being watched. By the time he left, every instinct in me screamed to pack up and go. But there's a strange pull trauma has. It makes you want to reclaim the space you lost. So instead of leaving, I gathered my things into a go bag and told myself I would stay only until sunrise the next day. Whisperfield rustled outside, the wind threading through the dead stalks like someone talking too softly to understand. I stood at the window for a long time that afternoon, wondering if I was hearing the wind or something else entirely. I checked into a cheap motel that night, but I couldn't stay. The walls felt too thin, and the sounds of people outside the door made me jump every time. I left before dawn, telling myself I just needed a few more things from the farmhouse. That was a lie. I needed to see it again, to prove to myself the men were truly gone. When I returned, the house was silent except for the occasional crack of wood in the cold. I fixed the mudroom window with a temporary board, then spent the morning organizing what little I could. That's when I found the folder on my computer. A folder labeled with a date I hadn't taken photos on. Inside were nighttime pictures of my house. My breath caught. The angles were strange, low to the ground, from the field, from the driveway, from just beneath my bedroom window. and the last image showed the side of the house with a faint reflection in the glass. A man's face. Blurry but close enough that he must have been inches from the siding when he took it. I called the officer from the night before. He said he'd swing by in the morning, but if I felt unsafe, I shouldn't stay there. Shouldn't stay. Not shouldn't return. But something stronger than fear kept me there, an anchor I couldn't explain. As darkness crept over Whisperfield that evening, anxiety crawled up my spine. The house cracked in the cold. Shadows stretched across the floor. I moved room to room, flashlight in hand, unable to sit still. Around 10, the power flickered again and went out completely. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. I stood in the dark, holding my breath, and from behind the shed, cutting through the silence like a knife, a whistle. The same soft, controlled tone from the night before. A signal. Something shifted deep in me, fear sharpening into clarity. They were back. I backed away from every window. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the flashlight. The whistle came again, and this time footsteps followed. Slow, steady, approaching the porch. My phone buzzed as I dialed 911 for the second time in 3 days. The dispatcher kept her voice calm, but I could hear the urgency when she said, "Stay hidden. Officers are coming." A knock hit the front door. Not frantic, not aggressive. A slow, deliberate knock, as if the person on the other side knew I was listening. Then a quiet voice spoke my name. Evan. I didn't recognize it. Calm, steady, too steady. "I know you're there," the man said. I pressed myself against the kitchen wall, trying not to breathe. The doorknob turned slowly, testing. I whispered to the dispatcher that someone was on my porch. She told me to stay on the line. I wished staying had ever once protected me. Another whistle came from somewhere near the shed farther away. A second man. They were coordinating. Footsteps circled the house, crunching softly through the snow. One man stayed near the front door, tapping lightly against the wood, as if impatient. The other moved along the back, his steps steady. They weren't breaking in, not yet. They were studying the house again, searching for a weakness. "We're not done," the man on the porch said. It was quiet enough that I wouldn't have heard it through the door, except Whisperfield carried the sound. The wind seemed to grab the words and drag them into the house, thin and stretched, but unmistakable. Even after everything I'd experienced, that was the moment I felt truly hunted. Sirens rose again in the distance. The footsteps shifted fast. The men retreated in opposite directions, one to the field, one toward the road. Within seconds, the night swallowed them. When officers arrived, they found fresh prints around the house, 2 sets this time. The men hadn't tried to force their way in. They hadn't yelled. They hadn't rushed. They had taken their time. "You should leave for a while," the officer said. I didn't argue. I left Kelford the next morning before the sky lightened. My truck heater blasted warm air, but I still felt the cold from the roof that first night, the way my palms stuck to the metal while the men tore through my room searching for me. As the farmhouse shrank in the rearview mirror, I felt relief and grief tangled together, like leaving a place that could have been a home if fear hadn't followed me there. I drove until the fields turned to forest, then forest to open road. I didn't stop until I crossed state lines. When I finally checked into another motel, cleaner this time, warmer, I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to make sense of what happened. The break-in years ago, the stalking in Kelford, the photos, the whispers, the word again. I didn't know if the same men were responsible, or if this was something separate, darker, random, yet deliberate. But one truth cut through all the noise. Those men did not choose my farmhouse by chance. Something tied them to me. I didn't go back to Kelford. I didn't return for my things. I arranged for a moving service to collect what was salvageable. I never received updates from the police, no arrests, no suspects, not even theories. But every now and then, late at night, editing photos in a new apartment far from Whisperfield, I hear it. A whistle, soft, deliberate, lodged in my memory, echoing through the quiet. I tell myself it's just a sound my mind has memorized too well. But a deeper part of me knows the difference between memory and instinct. Instinct warns you. Instinct remembers what danger feels like. And instinct tells me this isn't finished. Trust your instincts. They know the difference between fear and warning, between imagination and danger. When something feels wrong, act. Safety isn't found in silence. It's found in listening to the voice inside you that says move. I used to think my life had fallen apart quietly, like snow piling up overnight. No single moment of disaster, just a slow burial, missed rent leading to eviction, arguments with my girlfriend turning into a breakup, sobriety slipping between my fingers after months of holding on. When I finally came out of the haze, I found myself on a stranger's couch with no job, no apartment, and almost no one left to call. So I took the first job I could get. Winter caretaker at Twin Pines Lodge, a rundown roadside motel in Vermont. It sounded like the kind of place where you could disappear and nobody would ask questions. I figured a quiet season alone might force me to get my head straight. The lodge sat off an empty highway, tucked between dark pines that leaned like they were listening. The cabins were old, their paint peeling in long curls. A wooden sign out front carried the name in faded red letters. It wasn't pretty, but it was somewhere to be, and that was enough. Mr. Haskins, the owner, met me in the office. He was thin and gray-haired, with a tired face and a voice that rasped from too many cigarettes or too little sleep. He rushed through the orientation like he couldn't wait to leave. He pointed at a fuse box, handed me a ring of keys, and showed me the coffee maker in the office that looked older than both of us. When he stepped outside at 10 p.m., he paused with one foot in the snow. "Why?" I asked. He shook his head. "Just keep it locked." Then he got in his truck and drove off without looking back. I told myself every old motel has a story, probably involving a party gone wrong or a guest who trashed the place. Nothing worth worrying about. I settled at the front desk, trying to shake off the unease. I needed this job to be simple. I needed to stay clean, keep to myself, and stop disappointing everyone who still believed I was trying. The quiet should have comforted me, but instead it pressed in from all sides. The wind scraped at the windows. The heater clanked, like someone tapping a pipe in the attic. The place felt hollow, like it had too much space for the amount of life inside it. There was only one guest checked in, a woman named Laurel, around mid-30s, wearing a heavy jacket and a wrist brace. She'd arrived earlier in the evening. When she approached the office door around 11, she knocked softly, almost apologetically. "Sorry to bother you," she said. "I just wanted to ask if the cabins have deadbolts." "Yeah," I said. "They work fine." She nodded without relief. She kept glancing behind her toward the tree line like she expected someone to appear there. "You okay?" I asked. "I'm just passing through," she said. "Long drive." She attempted a smile that never fully formed. "It's just, can you keep an eye out tonight? If you don't mind." Something about her tone made me want to ask more, but she left before I could. I tried to distract myself with the maintenance logs Haskins left, but the lodge was too quiet to ignore. Around 11:30, I heard footsteps outside, slow, heavy, crunching the snow. I checked the security monitors, but the screens flickered and froze. When I stepped outside with a flashlight, the walkway was empty, only fresh tire tracks cutting across the lot that hadn't been there earlier. I told myself not to panic. I'd promised myself this job would be my calm place, no matter what my nerves tried to tell me. At midnight, the landline rang. I answered on instinct. Twin Pines Lodge. No response, just breathing, unsteady, shaky. I hung up, palms sweating. Wind whistled under the eaves. The heater rattled again. I stared at the phone, waiting for it to ring a second time. It didn't, but at 12:37, the porch light on cabin 12 flicked on. My stomach bottomed out. The cabin was locked, no guests assigned. No reason any light should be on. Before I could decide what to do, Laurel knocked on the office door again. Her voice shook when I opened it. "There's someone walking between the cabins," she whispered. "I saw him. I think he followed me here." "Who?" She glanced behind her, then closed the door quickly. "A man I used to work for. I was with him for a year. I didn't realize how bad things were until I couldn't leave. He took my ID, my phone, my money, controlled everything I did." She swallowed hard. "I ran a few weeks ago. I didn't think he'd find me." I wanted to reassure her, but the landline suddenly cut its own power with a soft click. My cell had no service. Hers didn't either. "Stay in here," I told her. "I'll check outside. Maybe it's nothing." "Please don't go far," she said. "I won't." I grabbed my flashlight again and stepped into the cold. The cabins formed a half moon around the lot. My breath hung in front of me as I walked. Snow muffled every sound except my footsteps. My beams skimmed across cabin numbers, dark windows, and snowdrifts stacked against doors. Halfway down the row, I saw something that forced my pulse into my throat, a boot print in the snow. Fresh, not mine. It pointed toward the back of the property where the supply shed sat. The shed door was cracked open. I stepped inside, shining my light around. Tools lined the walls. A stack of salt bags slumped in the corner. A long extension cord snaked across the floor. Everything looked normal, except for the sudden sense that something behind me had shifted. A presence in the doorway, a shadow. Before I could turn, an arm locked around my throat and yanked me backward. My flashlight clattered to the ground, spinning its beam across the snow. "You shouldn't have come out here," a man whispered. I kicked, elbowed, tried to break free, but he dragged me deeper inside. My head slammed against something metal, maybe a shelf. For a moment, everything went white. When I blinked back into myself, my wrists were zip-tied, and the shed door slammed shut from the outside. I was trapped. I shouted, but my voice seemed to die against the wood. Then I heard something that turned my blood cold. My own voice. It came from just outside the shed, calling out to Laurel. "Laurel, it's me. Open up." The tone wasn't quite right, too calm, too familiar. She might not realize the difference. I threw myself against the shed door until my shoulder burned, screaming her name. The cold seeped into my hands and face, numbing everything except fear. My breath puffed in frantic clouds as I tried to break the zip tie against a nail jutting from the wall. Each attempt sliced my skin, but I didn't care. Minutes dragged like hours. Then came a new sound, soft, distant, almost swallowed by the wind. A woman's voice. Weak. "Please, help me." It came from cabin 12. The cabin that wasn't supposed to be open. Something clicked then, what Haskins hadn't said, what he'd been afraid of. Someone had been using that cabin. Someone who knew the place well enough to stay hidden. Someone patient. Snow drifted through gaps in the shed roof, dusting my sleeves. My fingers swelled from the cold. I kept working the zip tie against the nail until finally, mercifully, it snapped. Outside, footsteps approached. Slow, purposeful, the shed door rattled. I held perfectly still. Whoever it was stood there long enough that I felt the cold creeping deeper, like time itself had stopped. Then the footsteps faded. A moment later, an engine approached, slow at first, then louder. Headlights swept across the lot. A car door opened. A voice called out. "State Police." The shed lock snapped. The door flew open, and a wave of warm air from the cruiser hit me like a punch. A trooper grabbed my arm and hauled me upright. Laurel ran toward us from the office. Her face was streaked with tears. "He told me he was you," she said, but I knew something felt wrong. I stayed quiet. The trooper settled us in his cruiser, turning the heat up as high as it would go. Backup was already on the way. He went to search cabin 12. Before we drove off, something made me look out the rear window. Between cabins 9 and 10, a figure stood among the shadows, tall, absolutely still, watching us leave. When the trooper's flashlight swept that direction, the figure disappeared into the trees. Inside cabin 12, the trooper found a padlocked storage chest, a torn winter coat, and a cassette recorder with a built-in microphone. Fresh footprints circled the room, pacing patterns that suggested someone had spent hours there. He told us someone had been using that cabin for a long time, living there, sleeping there, practicing voices. They knew the property well enough to avoid cameras and stay hidden. It took hours before I stopped shaking. Maybe it was the cold, maybe the adrenaline, maybe the realization that if the trooper hadn't passed by on patrol exactly when he did, neither Laurel nor I would have made it through the night. Laurel was taken into protective custody the next morning. I stayed in a rented room above a diner in town, still trying to absorb what had happened. I didn't tell my parents much, only that I was safe. I didn't tell them that every time I closed my eyes, I heard my own voice calling out from the dark. A week later, Mr. Haskins called me. I almost didn't answer, but something in me wanted closure. "I shut off power to the cabins," he said, "every single one, but tonight, cabin 12's light turned on." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. I stared out my window at the snow falling, thick and silent. "Maybe it's faulty wiring," I said finally. "No," he whispered. "It's not the wiring." I hung up and sat there in the dim light of the small rented room, trying not to picture the shadow I'd seen between the cabins, trying not to imagine that voice whispering through the dark. But the truth was simple: some people don't disappear just because you escape them. Some dangers linger, waiting for you to feel safe again. And somewhere out there, between the trees and the snow, someone was still waiting. Someone who knew my voice. Someone who wanted Laurel back. Someone who wasn't finished with Twin Pines Lodge. I didn't go up to Pine Creek Ridge to find ghosts. I didn't even believe in them. I went because I'd run out of places to fall apart without an audience. After the breakup and the collapse of my job in the same week, I needed somewhere, without deadlines, without coworkers pretending they weren't watching me unravel, without friends whispering they saw it coming. I needed a place where I could be alone on purpose, and not because someone left. My grandmother's house was the only place I could think of that felt disconnected from the rest of the world. She died 12 years ago, and no one in my family ever bothered selling the place. They treated it like a shed of memories, something you walk past in conversation but never open again. I hadn't seen it since I was 10. Since the summer, I stayed there for a week and woke up one morning convinced someone had walked upstairs, even though my grandmother swore no one else was inside. I'd told myself for years that it was a childhood dream. Fear makes shapes out of shadows. Kids hear creaks and imagine intruders. But I remembered the sound too clearly: deliberate footsteps, slow and heavy, moving toward my bedroom door before stopping just inches away. I'd buried that memory deep, but the moment I stepped into the dusty hallway again, the hairs on the back of my neck rose. The house hadn't changed. The feeling hadn't either. I arrived close to dusk. My boots sank into slushy snow. The porch sagged where time had chewed through the wood. Inside, the air smelled like stale cigarette smoke, old pine, and the faint metallic bitterness of winter air forced through cracks in loose window frames. Most of the furniture was still there: a sagging couch, faded curtains, and the cracked leather recliner by the window, the one I remembered my grandmother's partner, Earl, practically living in. It was tilted slightly toward the road, like it was waiting for someone to return. I tried not to think about him. My family never talked about Earl after he died. I only remembered two things: the sound of his smoker's cough, and how he always watched the front road like it owed him something. By 7:14 p.m., a storm rolled in. The electricity flickered hard enough to make the lights buzz. I ignored it and set up my tablet and sketch pad near the wood stove, hoping some spark of creativity might come back. But my hands kept hesitating, the pencil landing wrong, shaky, like I was waiting for the house to make a move. At 10:51 p.m., the landline rang. Not a full ring, just a single sharp beep. There wasn't even supposed to be service. The line had been dead for more than a decade. I shook it off. Old wiring, static from the storm, houses make noise. But the moment I stepped into the living room, something in my chest pulled tight. The recliner wasn't facing the window anymore. It was angled toward the hallway. I stared at it for a long time, long enough for my flashlight to flicker and for my pulse to thud in my ears like footsteps. That chair hadn't moved. I would have heard it. Floors like these never let anything slide quietly. I swallowed hard and walked away. But before I reached the kitchen, the old chair made a small, sharp creak behind me, like someone had just shifted their weight. I turned. The chair was still, but the faintest sway lingered in the leather. And for the first time since childhood, I felt truly, completely, not alone. Out at exactly 11:32 p.m. The entire house went dark so fast I didn't have time to react. My flashlight beam jittered across the floorboards as I tried to steady my hand. I told myself it was just the wind, just exhaustion, just the aftertaste of heartbreak messing with my nerves. But I couldn't stop glancing at the recliner. Every time the light touched it, I swore the seat cushion looked freshly pressed, like someone had just stood up. The leather moved in the faintest rhythm, like it still held the echo of a body's weight. I forced myself to stop staring and headed to the kitchen. I needed to keep my mind busy, needed something ordinary to drag me back to reality. I unpacked canned food. I tried humming. My voice shook. I told myself again that the house was old, the chair was old, the memory was old, everything was old except the fear, which felt new and sharp. At 12:19 a.m., I heard the first real noise. Not the wind, not the storm, not the usual creaks of wood expanding or contracting. It was the sound of breathing. Warm, steady, and too close to be anything but human. My first thought was that someone had broken in. The second was that maybe they'd been inside long before I arrived. The breath grew warmer, brushing the back of my neck. I froze. "You're sitting where I used to watch the road." The whisper was low, strained, like vocal cords dragging through gravel. I spun so fast I nearly slipped on the linoleum. The kitchen was empty. The doorway to the living room was open, just a dark frame leading to darker shadows. I backed away slowly, keeping my flashlight trained on the doorway. Nothing moved, nothing breathed, but the words hung in the air, clinging to the stale heat of the house. The only place someone could watch the road from was the recliner. A cold shudder crawled up my spine. I forced myself down the hall toward the bedroom. The storm roared outside like it was trying to warn me. Every board I stepped on creaked like something was following right behind me. I shut the bedroom door and locked it, then dragged the dresser in front of it, then the chair, then anything else I could push. My breathing turned loud and desperate, but the house went quiet. Too quiet. Then soft, dragging footsteps touched the hallway floor. Slow, heavy, uneven, the kind that belonged to someone who didn't have much strength left. They stopped directly outside the bedroom door. "You weren't here when I died." My stomach twisted, my throat locked, every inch of my skin crawled. The doorknob rattled once, then everything went still. I didn't sleep, I didn't blink. I just waited for the first hint of dawn, praying the house wouldn't decide to speak again. The cold woke me before the light did. My breath fogged in the bedroom, and for a moment I thought the window must have blown open, but it was sealed shut. The cold wasn't coming from outside. It was leaking in from under the door, a slow, creeping draft that carried the faint smell of cigarettes. I pressed my ear to the wood. Nothing. No breathing. No footsteps. Just the soft hum of a house that felt like it was listening. I waited until the faintest hint of morning light touched the wall before I moved the dresser. My arms shook the entire time. I told myself I'd laugh about this someday, that everything would make sense in daylight. But a tight knot sat in my gut, something deeper than fear, something like recognition. I opened the bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. It was freezing, the kind of cold that didn't belong in a house with thick insulation and a working heater. Except, the heater wasn't working anymore. The vent near the floor was completely dead. I crouched down and placed my hand over it. No air, no warmth, just cold metal. That's when I noticed the footprints, bare footprints, leading from the living room to my bedroom door. I followed them, each step sinking into the dust like someone had walked through the house that night, dragging their feet, leaving faint smudges of gray. They ended at the recliner. The chair faced the window again, like someone had returned to their place. My chest tightened. The stories my family never talked about suddenly felt too heavy to ignore. I remembered how my mother once said, "That house holds too much sadness." I'd thought she meant grief from my grandmother's illness, but sadness could cling to more than the living. The recliner creaked. Not like the wind, not like wood shifting, like weight settling. I whispered, "Who's here?" Even though I didn't want to hear the answer. For a long moment, nothing responded. The only sound was the storm easing outside, the wind calming like it had done its part. Then the faintest whisper slid through the room. "Don't leave me alone again." I backed away until my shoulders hit the wall. My mind raced. The cold, the footprints, the chair moving, the breathing, the voice. All of it pointed to one place. Earl's chair. His favorite spot. The place where he'd spent the last years of his life. Waiting. Watching. I needed to get out. The house was listening too closely, the air pressing too heavy around me, like someone didn't want me to leave. But I wasn't staying to comfort a dead man. I grabbed my bag, my keys, and Cooper, except I didn't have Cooper. I didn't have anything but fear and a frozen sense of urgency. The front door was halfway open when the house groaned behind me, a deep, painful sound like something rising from the chair. I didn't look back. I stepped into the snow and ran. My boots sunk into the drifts as I sprinted toward the road. I slipped twice, hit my knee hard enough to sting, but fear pushed me faster. The cold bit into my fingers, turning them numb, but the air outside felt safer than anything behind me. When I glanced at the house, just once, I saw the living room curtain shift, like someone had pressed their face against it to watch me leave. I didn't stop running. By the time I reached my truck, dawn was just brushing the tops of the pines. My hands shook so badly I dropped the keys twice before starting the engine. I didn't breathe easy until I hit the main road an hour later and finally got cell service. The first person I called was my mother. She was quiet for a long time after I told her what happened. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a kind of sadness I'd never heard from her before. "Lucas, you weren't supposed to stay there alone." "Why?" My voice cracked. "What did you never tell me?" Another pause. A broken one. "Earl died there," she said. "During a storm. The heater failed. He couldn't move from his chair. He was alone for weeks." I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" "Because you were a kid. Because your grandmother thought it was her fault. Because that house keeps echoes." "Echoes?" I repeated. My mother whispered. "Sometimes loneliness doesn't let go. Not even when a person does." I didn't know what to say. The road blurred a little, tears climbing before I could stop them. The image of the chair shifting, the voice whispering, the footprints trailing down the hallway, it all lined up like a puzzle I didn't want solved. Earl hadn't hurt me, but he had been waiting. Maybe for my grandmother. Maybe for anyone who'd once been part of his life. Maybe for someone who'd sit where he used to sit and listen to the same storm that once ended his. Loneliness is heavy. It attaches. It follows. Even when you run. I didn't go back to Pine Creek Ridge. Not to pack. Not to check the house. Not to look for proof. My cousin retrieved the rest of my things a month later. She said nothing felt strange, but she also refused to touch the recliner. She claimed the cushion still felt warm. I didn't ask what she meant. For weeks afterward, I felt things behind me, soft shifts of air, faint creaks, the sense that someone sat just out of sight. My therapist said it was trauma, a leftover imprint from fear. Maybe he's right. Maybe it was just my mind trying to make sense of what happened. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the slow creak of a recliner, just once, like someone sitting down to watch the road. And the air changes, and the room grows colder. And I think about Earl, about the long silence of an empty life, about the way loneliness can cling to walls, to furniture, to memories, to people. Some nights, I almost feel sorry for him. Other nights, I wonder if he ever really stayed behind at the house, or if he followed the only familiar footsteps that walked back into his world after all those years. I don't believe in monsters. I don't believe in demons. But I do believe in the way sadness sticks. I believe in the imprints people leave behind. And I believe that some spirits stay not because they're angry, but because leaving would mean accepting they died alone. I keep my lights on now. I keep my doors locked. I avoid old houses with old chairs facing old windows. And sometimes, when I drive late and the sky looks like the night of that storm, I catch myself checking the back seat, even though I know it's empty. Mostly, because loneliness doesn't always stay where it started. Sometimes it rides with you. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it waits. Loneliness is powerful enough to haunt places, memories, and people. Never ignore the silent weight someone carries, because the pain that goes unheard in life can become the presence that refuses to leave after death. I never liked the house on Valley View Road. It wasn't haunted-looking or old enough to be interesting. It just felt wrong in small, persistent ways I couldn't quite explain. The kind of place where the silence always sounded a little too loud. My parents brushed it off as rural life, but I always felt watched in that house. Especially in the blue room, the one they gave me. The room with the antique wardrobe I hated the moment I saw it. I was 17 in November 2014 when everything happened. I'd been dealing with anxiety around closets ever since I got accidentally locked in one on a school trip at age 9. My parents knew that story, but they didn't take it seriously. They liked the wardrobe. I didn't. It sat against the wall like it had some secret purpose. One night, I woke to scratching sounds behind it, soft at first, irregular, as if something tested the limits of the wood. I stayed still and listened, but the noise faded. I tried to convince myself it was a mouse. Old houses had pests. That was reasonable. Fear wasn't. The next day, my parents got a call from Seattle. Family emergency. They rushed out before noon, promising they'd be back in 2 days. I nodded, pretended to be fine, and watched their car disappear. I didn't feel fine. The house didn't feel fine. That evening, a storm rolled in, the kind that makes every shadow move. I was painting by the window, trying to distract myself, when lightning lit the backyard. For a split second, I saw a woman standing at the tree line, tall, still, facing the house. When the next flash came, she was gone. I told myself it was a trick of the light, my brain playing off fear. But Cooper, my dog, wandered into the room and stared at the wardrobe, growling low. He didn't bark. He growled like he'd found the source of something real. The scratching started again that night, louder, more deliberate. I kept telling myself rodents, anything else would break me. Around 10, I got a text from an unknown number. "You still stay in the blue room, don't you?" I froze. Another came. "Do you ever open the wardrobe?" I looked at the wardrobe, then at my phone. I typed back, "Who is this?" and waited. The message didn't send no reception because of the storm. My parents' calls failed too. Suddenly I felt exposed, like someone was testing me. I checked the house. Everything was locked except the back door, which I was certain I'd locked earlier. My stomach dropped. That wasn't a mistake. I grabbed a metal flashlight and dialed 911 from the landline. Static blasted through the speaker. I tried again. More static. Then a whisper through the line. "Don't look behind you." I did anyway. No one was there, but the footsteps in the hallway a moment later said someone was. I ran to my room, shoved furniture against the door, and held Cooper close. His gaze stayed fixed on the wardrobe. The doors suddenly shuddered from the inside, like something pushed against them. Scratch marks didn't sound like that. My breathing was so loud I couldn't hear anything else. The wardrobe shook again, harder this time, and Cooper barked, backing up like he expected it to burst open. I tried to think rationally, but terror doesn't care about reason. Something was inside the walls, or behind them, or trying to get out. I didn't want to find out which. The house fell silent except for the storm. I didn't hear footsteps anymore, but I didn't trust the quiet. Sometimes silence means someone's listening. I grabbed my phone again even though I knew it wouldn't work. No service. The unknown number was still on the screen, the messages sitting there like open wounds. "You still stay in the blue room. Do you ever open the wardrobe?" Those questions weren't random. They came from someone who knew the layout of the house, someone who'd been inside before, or someone who was inside now. The wardrobe hit the wall with a dull thud. Dust fell from the ceiling. Cooper barked again, the sharp kind of bark that comes from fear rather than aggression. I had one way out, the balcony. I dragged my desk toward the wardrobe to give me a few seconds if the doors burst open. Then I forced the balcony door open, grabbed the repair ladder leaning nearby, and propped it against the railing. The storm wind nearly knocked it over. I climbed fast, Cooper scrambling after me. Halfway down, a cracking sound exploded from the room above, wood splitting, something heavy falling, something forcing its way into the open. Lightning flashed. The silhouette of a tall woman stood near the fence. I didn't wait for another flash. Cooper and I hit the ground and sprinted toward the neighbor's house. Mud pulled at my shoes. Rain stung my face. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I didn't look back. Not even when I felt eyes on my spine the entire run. The neighbor's barn was unlocked. I shoved Cooper inside and pulled the door closed behind us. The storm muted outside, but inside the barn everything echoed my breath. Cooper's shaking, the creaks of old wood. After a few minutes, the barn settled. No footsteps followed, no shadows moved. But somewhere deeper inside the barn, a faint tapping started. Not random, rhythmic, like knuckles on wood, like someone asking to come out. I didn't sleep. I barely blinked. Every sound in that barn felt too close, too intentional. By dawn, my hands were stiff from gripping Cooper's collar like he'd run off without me. He didn't. He stayed glued to my side, staring toward the farthest corner like he sensed something I couldn't see. When the neighbor's dog barked outside, I almost screamed. Mr. Yates entered the barn with a flashlight, squinting until he saw me. "Evelyn, what are you doing out here?" My voice broke. Someone was in my house. He didn't ask questions. He just helped me up and brought me inside. His wife wrapped me in a blanket and called 911. I sat in their living room while hot tea shook in my hands. The adrenaline had worn off and left a cold emptiness behind. The police arrived quickly. Officer Romero was calm, direct, and careful with her words. She asked me what happened from the moment the first text arrived. I explained it all. The scratching, the wardrobe, the texts, the unlocked door, the voice on the phone, the footsteps, the wardrobe shaking. I gave her everything. Her expression didn't change, but I saw something tighten behind her eyes. They searched the house while I waited with the Yateses. 40 minutes later, the officers returned, faces paler than before. "There are claw marks inside the wardrobe," Romero said. "Deep ones. And the back panel is broken open." I swallowed hard. "Broken from the inside?" She nodded. "There's a crawl space behind it. Someone's been living there." My skin crawled. Every hair stood on end. "And Evelyn," she added, lowering her voice. "We found clothing in the crawl space, belonging to a missing woman." Another officer added, "We also found footprints in your closet. Fresh ones. And an old phone under the floorboards." My stomach twisted violently. Was it the number that texted me? Yes. So whoever sent the messages wasn't outside the house. They were inside the walls. They had been listening, maybe watching, for who knows how long. I didn't ask to go back. I didn't need to. The officers made it clear the house wasn't safe. And that something about it wasn't new. My parents came back the next morning, hours earlier than expected. They didn't react with disbelief or anger. They reacted with fear. Real fear. The kind that collapses you when you finally understand your child wasn't exaggerating. We stayed with the neighbors while police continued searching the property. They brought in more units, more lights, more equipment. I caught pieces of whispered conversations, mentions of tunnels, disturbed dirt, signs someone moved around at night. My parents wanted answers. The police didn't have many. "One person couldn't create all that without you hearing," one officer said. "But we only found one set of recent footprints." "So was I imagining things?" I asked. "No," Romero said firmly. "Someone was definitely there. But we can't confirm how long." I remembered the first night we moved in, when I swore I heard movement in the walls and my parents told me it was the pipes settling. I remembered Cooper whining at the wardrobe countless times. I remembered things going missing, doors I thought I locked being unlocked, the faint feeling of being watched whenever I changed clothes or opened the curtains. It all clicked together like puzzle pieces I didn't want. Someone had been living in our home long before I understood they were there. That night, I overheard two locals at a diner mention the house. They whispered about the woman who lived there years ago, before she went missing. A woman who hid in wardrobes to cope with trauma. A woman who knew the crawl spaces well. Their conversation wasn't dramatic, just resigned. Like everyone already believed, the house held dark corners that never truly emptied. When the police cleared the place for the final time, we refused to step inside. My parents hired people to pack our belongings. I didn't want anything from that room anyway. Not the wardrobe, not the bed, not even my paintings. I felt like everything in that space had been touched without my permission. That night, as we drove past the house on the way out of Pine Brook, I glanced back one last time. The blue room window was dark, but I swear something moved in the shadows behind the glass. Not a figure exactly, just a soft knock, echoing in my mind like it never stopped. We moved away from Pine Brook within the month. Not because the police told us to, they said the house was clear, but because none of us believed that. Safety isn't about what's proven. It's about what your instincts scream at you. For the first few weeks in our new home, I barely slept. I checked behind every door, every closet, every drawer. I started keeping furniture against the wall near my bed. Cooper slept by my door like he took the role of guard dog personally. Therapy helped me understand fear, but not erase it. Time helped me sleep again, but never deeply. Even years later, long after high school and college, long after we lost touch with that part of our lives, I still feel something tighten in my chest whenever I see a wardrobe or hear scratching in a building. My brain knows it's probably nothing, but instinct remembers. Not ghosts, not anything supernatural. A real person lived in the walls of that house. A real person knew where I slept, where I showered, what I did every day. A real person watched me for weeks, maybe months, without making themselves known until they wanted to. That's what scares me most. Not what I saw. What I didn't. I still think about the tall woman at the tree line, whether it was the missing woman, or someone else, or something my brain created to make sense of a threat I couldn't see. I'll never know. But I learned that ignoring fear only gives danger time to grow. Sometimes the things we tell ourselves are nothing are the exact things we should run from. I check closets now. I check walls. I trust my instincts. Because the worst danger I ever faced wasn't in a nightmare or a story. It was in the house I slept in, just a few feet away. Listening. Never ignore your instincts. Fear exists to protect you, and paying attention to small warning signs can save your life.